Hey people, I'm Sergio Parisi and you're watching Rugby Wrap-Up.
Coming up next, Steve Lewis, Barry Herbert, and Matt McCarthy talk about the international tests and the rugby weekend. Brought to you by Irish Rugby Tours, the Rugby Tour Specialists, AFIA Sports Training, committed to developing the sporting potential of future players in the U.S., UK, and across the world. And Dub Pies, Down Under Pies. Stop by, say hi, and eat pie. And the Pig and Whistle on West 36th Street. Hey everybody, welcome back to Rugby Wrap-Up. Matt McCarthy in Midtown Manhattan with Steve Lewis at the Fantasy Sports Network Studio 34. And we have on the horn with us South African living in Denver, Barry Herbert. Hi Barry, how you doing?
I'm doing great, thank you.
And what better way to talk about that England-South Africa game than to go to Steve Lewis, the Scotsman, first. Steve, you want to talk about this one a little bit?
Well, apart from the forces of evil and darkness triumphing over South Africa by a bare single point, the main talking point for me clearly was the Farrell tackle at the end of the game. There's a pattern now of some big decisions, big refereeing decisions, and in my mind going the wrong way. Farrell was one. Sean Davies in the USA game also. But Farrell, clearly no rap. He's been trolled brilliantly on Twitter today by Rassie Erasmus, the Springboks coach. They did a little video you've probably seen.
That was great. Yeah,
it's good. But it was clearly yellow, no intent. Farrell's an abrasive player. He's a physical player. I wouldn't mind him on my side, but the guy's got a history, and you know, it comes down to, it actually doesn't come down to intent by the letter of the law, but that was a yellow card. That was a penalty, and the Springboks could have sneaked it.
Barry?
Well, yes, thanks, Matt. Well, firstly, just to get into the game itself, I would like to touch on this talking point in the 83rd minute in a little bit. But in the game itself, narrow victory for England, 1 point in it. And you just felt pretty much the whole way that South Africa were the better team again in this fixture. So that's 2 weeks running that the Springboks have dominated the opposition and then not got the job done. So not really acceptable from the Springbok spectators or the coaching staff or even the players' perspective. But that's the reality. They've gone and lost another test match they should have won, and they will be stinging. So, yeah, not a great performance, not the best test match either. Just the one try for Sabu and Corsi, and very few scoring opportunities for both teams. So a real grind for both sets of forwards, not much momentum for either team, and just not a great spectacle of rugby, unfortunately. I think there were better games this weekend than the England-South Africa game.
Barry, you want to weigh in on the non-yellow?
Yes, I do, Matt. I think on behalf of a lot of Springbok supporters right now, we're feeling a little aggrieved by that incident. Referee Angus Gardner quite clearly got that wrong. We've all had a good look at it now. I think the jury is pretty much out. What's shocking is that there's been no further sanction from World Rugby on this, and Eddie Jones and everybody else seems to think that it's absolutely fine. So very happy with Rassie Erasmus's response there, which has been quite amusing. The response to this, how we should be tackling going forward.
Yes.
I think it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but nonetheless, we should be really getting some consistency back into this law because it's turning into a bit of a shambles right now.
Well, I'm just the crazy Yank, but I think that was a yellow card for sure.
Absolutely.
But what do I know?
Wedge of cheese all the way. Show him the cheese.
Barry, why no attempt at a drop goal?
Well, again, that's the second week in a row that we've been right under the opposition's posts. Same thing in New Zealand. There were 2 or 3 opportunities there to put the game away with a drop goal. So I'm starting to ask questions about the leadership on the field to actually get the job done in tight situations. I just want to say that I think Siya Kolisi is an outstanding captain, has done a great job for South Africa. But in those pressure moments, we don't seem to be adjusting or adapting, and we're not seeing the opportunity to win a test match, and we failed twice. So yes, that opportunity was right there, and they once again they went for the try. They were unsuccessful, and we all know what happened in the 83rd minute.
Steve, a Johnny Wilkinson, a Johnny Sexton, a Ronan O'Gara, an Owen Farrell are all calling for the ball for a job goal right there.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's a dying art, but you're right. It seems to have disappeared from most people's skill set. I mean, these guys are professionals. They do it. They practice it. They've done it. So Barry's probably right. It comes down to that composure, that poise, and someone has to show some cojones and step up and call for it. And usually it's the 10, and that 10 will stand or fall by the success of that kick. So it's a nervy thing, but that's why they're paid the big bucks in those positions. They should be calling for it.
All right. Well, a couple of standout performances in that one for me, though, were Mark Wilson. Newcastle is suddenly a team to be watching. They're exciting. They had a great start in the European Championship Cup, and now they're starting to find their footing in the Premiership. And then George Cruz, I think, had a great match. What's your take on that, Barry?
Well, I have about 3 or 4 standout performers on the Springboks side, but not really much to crow about. I thought Damien Dalendi, the inside centre, played particularly well. He's been in very good form the last few weeks. Peter Steph de Toy played at lock this weekend, has been utilised on the blindside flank, has been a standout all season. And he had another very, very good game. So he's a player to really keep your eye on going into the World Cup. And then Eben Etzebeth, a massive first half until he got injured. We're not sure how bad that injury is or whether he will be available for the remainder of the tour. But those players stood out for me. And I thought Farrell had a pretty good game for England. Despite the tackle, I thought he was very good. But it really wasn't a showing where you had a lot of standout individual performances of any real note apart from those that I just mentioned.
And we were engaged in an Instagram war with some folks where they were all citing the lineouts, the inability to get their own lineouts for South Africa.
Yeah, that was disappointing. Malcolm Marx has been one of the best players in World Rugby this year. I think he's in line for that honor, in fact, with World Rugby. And he just was completely off the boil in this game. So, unfortunately, the lineout went to pieces this week for South Africa, which is strange. It's a real strength of the box. And I expect them to fix that pretty quickly. I don't think we've got some really tall timber there. All 4 of those locks are outstanding. So the throwing has got to be good. And unfortunately, Mark's missed his mark. And no good. No good lineouts. It's tried winter begging.
You got the bell ringing on that one. That was oof. You snuck that one. Was that scripted? Okay, let's talk about Wales, Scotland.
Okay, 21-10 in Cardiff. 15th loss out of 17 for Scotland now, so it's becoming a bit of a bad habit if you're Scottish. Scotland had the chances. Actually, had dominated possession. Were camped in the Welsh second half. 2 glaring defensive mistakes by Hugh Jones, who's a terrific player, but he missed Jonathan Davis on one. And he missed George North on the other, and that was the difference. Interesting, home countries playing a test match in the autumn for the first time, but it was the Doddie Weir fundraiser, so that was a big part of it. Good occasion, raised a lot of money. Both the Scottish and Welsh unions were shamed into donating in the end, but
let's do tell.
Yeah, so, it was Doddie Weir's game, right? And they're raising money for charity. But the gate receipts none of that was going to Doddie Weir until there was a bit of a furore in the press and the public said enough's enough. And my understanding is both unions eventually contributed a 6-figure sum to his
that's great.
Fund. So next up for Scotland is Fiji. Gregor Townsend referred to them as the Brazil of rugby, which means a lot of flair, a lot of a fun team to watch, and they certainly are. Fiji are going places. A lot of players now in European leagues. This is perhaps their golden generation of players in my mind. So it's a sold-out Murrayfield, Scotland versus Fiji. Finn Russell could be back. Stuart Hogg actually has made a fast recovery. He's in the squad for this Saturday. So Scotland are getting closer to full strength as well. This could be a very interesting game.
Speaking of injury, on the Welsh side, it was good to see that George North and Lee Halfpenny, who had some great kicks in a relatively tight contest for the most part, they were back in good form.
Means nothing. Irrelevant.
It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. If it's not Scottish.
It's not the Six Nations, not the World Cup. It's a friendly.
right, we also had Japan getting 5 tries against the All Blacks in Tokyo, right? But that was a lopsided score, but 5 tries. One could argue, Barry, that the All Blacks defense isn't what it's all cracked up to be.
Well, yes, Matt, they seem to be leaking a lot of points and backing their ability to score a lot more tries than the others, which was the case again on Saturday. Far more entertaining game than the Springboks versus England game. But yeah, All Blacks just way too strong for Japan, really. It was a good performance, and it was great to see a big crowd there. I think the game was in Tokyo, and it was a good spectacle, and great for the people in Japan to be able to see the All Blacks. And I thought Brave Blossoms did great. They were gutsy, and they're on track for a decent showing in the World Cup.
Yeah, they had a 7-3 lead, and it's a precursor of the exciting stuff that we're going to see in Rugby World Cup 2019 in Japan, because it is a rugby playing nation. Stephen.
Yeah, to that point, it was good. You're right. It's a record crowd, 45,000, which is great for Japan ahead of the World Cup. Fact of the matter is that it wasn't your All Blacks A side, right? They took 51 players to Japan. They took this opportunity to blood players, so 2 kicks charged down as well for those tries. So I wouldn't get too worked up about it, but a competitive host team in the World Cup is going to be good. So we want Japan to be going well.
And that'll segue into our chat about the rugby weekend after the break, because of those players, they didn't have the Maori.
True.
Right? So don't go away. We'll be right back with Mr. Barry Herbert and Mr. Steve Lewis talking international rugby, talking the rugby weekend specifically, right after this.
If you're in New York City and want to watch some great rugby, have some great food, and some great times, go to the world's best rugby pub, the Pig and Whistle on West 36th Street.
Puff the magic dragon lived by the sea.
And ladies and gentlemen, here's our latest with Jonathan Wicklow Barbry's piece, Did the Dragons Win?
Yes, Matthew, I'm down here on the ground here in New York City with the doorman, Rich. As you know, doormen in New York City know everything. Rich, quick question for you. Did Dragons win?
The Dragons? They never win.
Puff the magic dragon lived by the sea and frolicked.
Been blind since I was 4. And I've never seen a beer commercial or a beer label. None of that stuff influences me. I drink beer because of the taste. And my beer's Pabst Blue Ribbon. It has the taste and the flavor.
What do you think's on the label?
I think there's a naked woman riding on a unicorn, jumping over fire. Oh, that's good beer.
And we are back at Rugby Wrap-Up. Mr. Steve Lewis and Mr. Barry Herbert calling in from Denver, although he's actually from South Africa. Gentlemen, we were talking earlier about the international tests overseas. We had the rugby weekend of international flavor here in Chicago at Soldier Field. Stephen, you were there.
Indeed, I was. I would say it was something of an underwhelming weekend. 30,000 tickets sold, which is a little disappointing. You had 3 games played. It's a 9-hour day. It's a long day. Some people came for the first game and disappeared. Some came for the later games. So to my mind, there really wasn't more than 20,000 people. So the atmosphere wasn't great. With regard to the games, kind of went as expected. Opened up with the USA women losing heavily to New Zealand. That having been said, they're pretty much set up for failure. They haven't played a game in 14 months. They only managed to get together on the Monday. They've only had 3 days practice, and you're putting them up against the number 1 team in the world. First game back. So not fair on the players, not fair on the new coach. Somewhat unsurprising, the result. Positives, a lot of players' debut was being made. So 7 starters, I believe another 5 or 6. So that's a good thing. And they are on tour now. They're playing England Friday. Then they play Ireland. And I believe USA Rugby has made a commitment that they will be playing more test matches in the summer, which is what the women's program need. They need to play rugby. They need games. So that result, it is what it is. Park it, move on.
Let's go to the Italy-Ireland game now.
Okay. Italians put up a good fight, 14-7 at the half. They were going okay, and then just Ireland switched on the afterburners, blew them away in the second half. Standout performance from Ireland. Fullback Jordan Lamour scored a hat-trick in one real highlight try down the left-hand side. So good stuff for Good stuff for Ireland. For Italy, another heavy defeat. And where do they go from here? You know, they get a lot of flack about whether they should be in the Six Nations. Both their club teams have gone better this year in the Pro 14. But it's going to be a real test this weekend because Italy played Georgia.
Yeah.
And Georgia are everyone's favourites to replace them. Georgia has certainly improved
in the Six Nations.
Yeah, but it's not going to happen.
Right.
Commercial reasons.
But no, I'm just specifying that.
Yeah. But, you know, this will be interesting because Italy are basically, you know, on the spot, as it were. So that'll be interesting. So that game was, again, as expected. Commercially, what was interesting about this weekend is it just goes to show, in my opinion, that the only brand that can sell out a major stadium is the All Blacks. Okay, they did against Ireland, did against USA. You got the Maori, you had Ireland playing 30,000, Scotland not quite 20 in Houston. There's one brand that can sell out a major sports stadium in the US, and it's the All Blacks. So, did this weekend make sense other than the competition? The US team will get to that game in a minute. It's outside the test window, so they don't have their top players. Right? The Eagles did not have our top players.
So I was getting into discussions with people that were telling me that it was inside the test window.
No.
So next week starts the official test window for all the nations?
Yep.
Okay, so I was right. Pig and whistle.
Right, so basically what I'm saying is, and then Pat Clifton wrote a good article about this, you're basically showcasing our teams, putting them against the top dogs in the world. You know, we're not giving them a competitive game, in my opinion, and it probably wasn't the appropriate venue. The only good thing is USA Rugby weren't running it. It wasn't being run by RIM, so we didn't lose money. Right. This was a different arrangement, legacy agency. Yeah. So that part of the commercial arrangement, we didn't lose money, but to my mind, it wasn't quite. It was just an off weekend. Didn't feel quite right.
Well, you followed Ireland versus New Zealand at Soldier Field with this card, and again, we didn't have some of our bigger names because they weren't released from their clubs, or they may have been injured.
Yep, them's the rules. Yep.
So, but then don't have the match.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, so let's get to the match, right? 59-22, I believe, in the end. So if you're Gary Gold, our head coach, looking at it, you know, it's an extra game. Every game is good. Lets him test his depth. But this wasn't easy. They had multiple players missing. In the build-up to the game, a couple of unfortunate injuries. Luke Hume, hamstrings. So he was gone on the Thursday. Yep. Nate Augsburger, the captain, on the wing, pulled his quad on a Friday night, on a Friday afternoon captain's run or whatever. So he was out. Had to make a couple of late changes. Ben Landry got injured. And then, of course, Sean Davis got concussed. So they're limping into Spain. They've got a Samoa, which is going to be a physical encounter next weekend without two of the top nines. They've called in Phil Boyer and they've called in Devereaux Ferris, and Ruben De Haas, who's the youngster playing for the Cheetahs, is going to get a lot of time. So it's one of those cases, the head coach, you know, you're going to see what depth you have or haven't got.
Yeah.
This is now going to be a tough tour for the Eagles. Samoa, Romania in Bucharest, and then Ireland in Dublin. So yeah, it was an okay performance by the Eagles. But.
Right. You'll get some key players back. You'll get Blaine Scully back. You'll get Manu Samoa. You'll get Joe Tauafetehe. So
TT.
TT Lamosatelli.
Yep.
Sure. You know, so
Tamalo from Glasgow.
Yeah. So you get some. Greg Peterson was there for this one. He'll be back. So you get some solid players in there. So it'll be exciting to watch, and I'm looking forward to it. And you're right. It's you're at 9 and 10 specifically. They don't have any depth. But Barry, this also marked the end of the perfect run in the Gary Gold era. And I just wonder if it's a South African thing.
No, not at all. I think Gary's done a great job since he's come to the helm. As you guys have both alluded to, you know, when you've got that many players unavailable against a really, really talented group like the Maori, it's going to be a tough ask. So, no, Gary's got a long road ahead of him on this tour for sure. The depth is going to be tested again. But let's see what the Eagles look like when they get all their players back. I think they're very competitive, as they've shown in the previous 7 games. So, it's not all doom and gloom. It will be a tough tour for them now. But, everything in World Rugby is gearing into next year, guys. So, I think there's still some hope for the Eagles for a good showing next year.
All right, let me ask you guys the question that people were pontificating upon. or just being ridiculous about at the Pig and Whistle. And I asked, where would the Maori be ranked internationally if we could have that? So go ahead, Barry. Where would you rank them?
Well, they'd probably rank in the top 5. If we're assuming that they're a New Zealand or All Black B team, then yeah, I think they would rank in the top 5. I think they're that good. Again, I didn't have a really good analysis of that squad, but you know that the next in line is good enough to play for most international teams down there in New Zealand. So very strong, top 5 for sure.
Stephen?
I disagree. I would go top 10. I go 8, 9, 10. I mean, I think it was a full test matches with countries trotting out the top sides. And they'd knock off a top 5 side every now and again, but they wouldn't be consistently top 5 for me. But they'd be 8, 9, 10.
Gentlemen, let's go to predictions. Barry?
Okay, so first game up here, New Zealand, England versus New Zealand. I think it's going to be very tough there for England to roll them at this stage. They didn't show enough against the Boks to convince anybody they're going to beat New Zealand. I think it'll be 10 to 15 points, Matt. I think it'll be reasonably comfortable for the All Blacks.
Stephen?
I think the mighty Blackness will beat the Queen's 15 by at least 15 to 20 points.
Yeah, I think England's going to play this one tough. I think they're going to play a grinded-out kind of match. The All Blacks have been susceptible on defense, so I think there might be some points scored, but not necessarily by the home team. So I think they'll play with pride for a long time, but they can't keep up with the All Blacks, and I think it's going to be probably about 12 points differential. The next one up, you've got France versus your South African team. How are the boys there, Barry? Are they going to bounce back?
Yes, I think they will. We've got Willie Leroux, Faf de Klerk, Francois Lowe, and Cheslin Colby all coming back into the selection for this weekend. And I think the Springboks will be much stronger with those guys coming in. So I'm going to go with a 5 to 10 point Springbok win here.
Steve, which French team is going to show up? I don't know.
Good question. I'm going Yappies by 10. I think they'll bounce back because I don't know what's going to come. You don't know what the French are going to put out there.
I love your nicknames. You got to love the nicknames. I'm gonna agree with both of you. I don't think that France is. They're just impossible.
Don't overthink it.
You can't overthink it. So I'm going to go with South Africa, but in a tight match. I'm going to go with like 4 points. Write it down. And you've got Scotland versus Fiji. Stephen, you talked about this one earlier. Mm-hmm. Let's go to Barry first.
As much as I love the Fijians and the way they play, I do think Scotland have been playing pretty good rugby over the last year or two and should get there. I think they'll. I think this one is going to be Scotland, and it will also be, a 7-point game here within one score. Fiji will push them hard.
Stephen, he's got one score.
Forces of goodness and light will triumph over our Fijian brothers, but then I think going away 15, 20 points.
Oh, I think the ghost of William Wallace at Murray Field would be too much for the Fijians. I think they're going to be running amok a bit, and I think it's going to be Scotland by 15 points.
It's November. It's Edinburgh. That's not Fijian weather.
It's not, and it's not 7, so it's going to. They're on the field longer than 14 minutes. They're going to be cold. Italy, Georgia. This is an intriguing matchup.
It is actually. This, in some ways, is the one I want to see most. I think Georgia. I think Italy is hard to bounce back from that. That's a tanking away from home again. I mean, they now I think lost 17, 18 out of 19. Georgia got a bit of confidence. Got a new coaching staff. Actually, Graham Roundtree is helping Georgia out now, and they've got a sort of essentially a billionaire backer. They've had a lot of money in Georgian rugby over the last 3-4 years, and they've got front 5 forwards playing all over Europe. They're going to be, I think, too strong for the Italians up front. I'm going Georgia. Georgia by 10.
Barry?
Yeah, I agree with that. Far too strong up front. They turned into a bit of a factory, a prop factory down there in Georgia, supplying everyone in World Rugby. Love to see them all play together and see what that forward pack can do. Italy are woeful at the moment, so Georgia. I'm tipping Georgia to win that, actually by 10 to 15 points.
All right, I'm going the other direction because Sergio Arese was on the show, and he is. I have a man crush on him. He is a rugby rock star, and the guy I want to be.
He's got better hair than you.
He's got better everything than me, and I'm not afraid to say it, Sergio, my amigo. And for that reason, I'm picking Italy. The influence, and his calf might not be ready to go. Yes, he's 35 years old, but he's got an influence on that team. I think they're going to come out firing. I'm picking Italy by 6. Now let's talk about the USA versus Samoa.
Yeah, we sort of touched on earlier, all the foreign stars coming back for the Eagles. It's in San Sebastian, I think they're playing it. Samoa, first game out for them on this tour, but they're a big physical team. They're getting their act together again. It's going to be a tough one. Unfortunately, I think Samoa will win it, but pretty close, 5 or 6.
Barry?
I agree with that. It will be good to see the Eagles with their full squad, or everybody who's available, and to see how they go. But Samoa will probably get home in a close one. So I'm going to say less than 5-point victory for Samoa.
I hate to say it, but the 9-10 issues for Team USA will keep them from winning this one, and I think they're going to lose by 8 to 10 points.
One final tournament of interest this weekend. It's the Repechage for the World Cup. So
you say Repechage.
I said Repechage. So we have Canada, Kenya, Germany, and Hong Kong are duking out for that final place in the World Cup.
That's right.
That tournament starts this weekend. I hope our northern neighbours can pull it out. I think they will, actually. I think Canada will go through from those 4.
We need a soundbite of Sean Connery saying Repechage.
Repechage.
On that note, speaking of sound bites, we are out of time. Mr. Barry Herbert, I want to thank you for calling in from Denver and being from South Africa.
Thanks, Matt. It's been great to be on the show again.
And my Repechage co-host, Steve Lewis. Steve, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. On that note, thank you for tuning in. Matt McCarthy for Steve Lewis and Barry Herbert at the Fantasy Sports Network Studio 34 in New York City, signing off.